Adventure riders rely far too much on their rear brake. It's not as effective as the front brake, and it can be dangerous. It's just simply not as effective as using your front brake if you need to stop in a hurry. In this video, we're going to demonstrate why it's important to use your front brake, and we're going to go over some of the physics involved with motorcycle braking in general. Hi, I'm Rob Day, and one of the things that I see fairly often is ineffective braking on a motorcycle, especially an adventure motorcycle. Primarily people trying to stop with their rear brake, and it's simply not as effective as using the front brake. It's a mistake, and it can lead to bad outcomes, longer stopping distances, contacting an obstacle, going off trail, or, and I have seen this firsthand, running into another rider. So today we're going to break this down in this video and explain to you the dynamics of what's going on and the physics of how motorcycle braking works. And hopefully the idea here is to get you to practice more and use your front brake more and rely on it in an emergency situation. Most people rely far too heavily on the rear brake. I've seen riders lock up the rear brake and slide until they run into something, and sometimes that's another rider. So it's not just yourself you're putting in danger, it could be somebody else. I've also seen riders use their rear brake to try and control their trajectory on a trail, and once that rear brake is locked up, you have a very limited ability to change direction, and I've seen some of them go off the edge of the trail before. The rear brake is still good for lots of stuff. Slow speed maneuvering, especially full lock turns, or skid steering, or questionable traction situations. These are all situations where you do need to rely on that rear brake as your primary brake. However, the rear brake is simply not effective at stopping the motorcycle. The front brake is your stopping brake. If you need to bring the bike to a stop, you need to think about using the front brake. The rear brake is for maneuvering. The front brake is for stopping. When you begin braking on a motorcycle, regardless of which brake you use or both, all of this weight of the motorcycle and the rider begins to transfer onto the front wheel. That creates more traction, which means there's more braking force available, but at the same time, it's lightening the rear end, which means that that same braking force may be now ineffective and cause a skid far sooner than you had expected it to. So let's take a look at the front wheel. You'll notice on almost all bikes, especially the bigger bikes, we've got two very large rotors, brake rotors up front. And that's for a reason. It's because this front wheel is your primary stopping wheel. All right, so now looking at the rear brake, you'll notice that we only have one rotor here, and it's a lot smaller than the two that you saw on the front wheel. Manufacturers and designers of motorcycles know that this wheel doesn't have the stopping power that the front wheel has, and that's why you only see this one rotor back here. Correct braking technique, especially in a panic or emergency situation, almost always involves using both brakes. You have to, you should use them. But we want to initiate the weight transfer onto the front wheel before we operate the front brake. To do that, we will begin with a light touch on the rear brake. That initiates the weight transfer so that now when we get on the front brake, we've got more traction and more braking force available to us, and we can really apply a lot of force and come to a rapid stop on the front brake. Once we begin using this front brake, we don't want to quickly grab it. Operating this front brake quickly is the thing that can initiate a front wheel skid. We want to use progressive increasing pressure on the front brake. It happens relatively quickly in about a second to full brake lever touching the grip type of braking, right? But we just don't want to get there immediately, right? We don't want to skid the front wheel. What we want to do is use smooth increasing pressure on the front brake. By doing so, what happens is we get more weight transfer, which translates to more traction, which means more braking force available to us, and we can keep squeezing and squeezing and squeezing until we get to a point where this thing is almost touching the grip, or it is touching the grip. And then we can come to a really rapid stop on the front brake. By using smooth increasing pressure on the front brake, we can come to the quickest and safest stop possible on all kinds of terrain, asphalt, dirt, whatever. So now let's spend just a couple of minutes talking about ABS, anti-lock braking systems. A thing happened around 2021 where now when you purchase a premium adventure bike like the Pan America, the GS, the Super Adventure, you can no longer turn off ABS to the front wheel. And it sort of hampers my ability to train people, but it's still a good thing. It's a safety issue, and that's why they did this, right? But some bikes, you still can turn off the ABS. And a good example is one of my favorite bikes, the Yamaha T7. It's dirt simple. There's one button on the dash and it's ABS on or off. So in that case, you can turn the ABS completely off. Now, when you're using proper braking technique like we described, if you feel that front wheel begin to skid, your reaction should be to immediately release the brake and then reapply it correctly. Because what that's telling you is you either applied too much force or you applied it too quickly. And so you can skid that front wheel on a bike where you can turn the ABS off to the front wheel. So on older ABS systems, on adventure motorcycles, they were very simplistic and they didn't give you the feedback that the newer systems do. On a newer system, you can feel through the chassis and the lever or the pedal, the ABS activating. You feel pulsation. The older systems didn't give you that feedback. It was very difficult to determine if the ABS was operating or not. And the older systems were problematic because they were so simplistic that you could get into trouble picking up speed that you didn't want. For example, going down a steep hill, if you had forgot to turn your ABS off, you would be applying more and more braking pressure to try and slow down. But the system was trying its best not to allow the wheels to lock, and they would keep releasing pressure, and you could pick up speed that was unmanageable that would result in a crash. So in the case of the older systems, we would always teach ABS off-road. That was like the cardinal rule. Now we have newer systems. We started getting things like lean angle ABS in around 2019. And around 2021, premium bikes started to have a feature where you could no longer turn off ABS to the front wheel at all. It's always on. And that's actually a good thing because the newer systems are far more sensitive and they operate way better. They'll cover up a lot of mistakes. And even in the most liberal off-road modes, you can still sort of overuse that front brake a little bit and not have to worry as much about a problem. So good examples would be Harley Davidson has off-road mode and off-road plus mode. So in off-road mode, you still retain your lean angle ABS so that if you have a panic situation and you're already in a turn, it's probably going to turn out okay. BMW calls them Enduro and Enduro Pro. Same thing. In Enduro mode, you retain your lean angle ABS. When you switch to the more advanced modes, in BMW's case, Enduro Pro, Harley Davidson, it's Off-Road Plus. We do still have a little bit of front wheel ABS, but now we've eliminated the lean angle ABS on these bikes. So it's important to understand how your bike operates, what system you have, what year is your bike. You need to read the manual. So if you've gotten into the habit of using only your rear brake to stop, you're going to be stopping in very, very long distances. And in an emergency, that's not going to work. Here's an example of trying to perform an emergency stop using only the rear brake. And look at how long my stopping distance is. So how do we stop a motorcycle quickly, regardless of terrain? We use both brakes. Always, we use both brakes. And look at the dramatic difference in my stopping distance. It's very short now. There's going to be situations where you want to use one or the other, but for the most part, we're going to use both brakes all the time, especially in an emergency situation. When we want to stop quickly, we're going to start with the rear brake and then move to the front brake, applying them both. The reason that we start with the rear is we want to initiate the weight transfer onto that front tire before we begin braking. That way we'll have lots and lots of braking power available to us when we finally do apply the front brake. And they're pretty close together. It's rear front, about that spacing. So that now, once the weight is transferred onto the front wheel, and we do apply the front brake, we're gonna have plenty of braking authority and be able to come to a nice quick stop. So the proper way to use your front brake is with smooth, increasing pressure. And what that means is, you don't wanna jab that front brake because you haven't had a weight transfer yet and you'll skid the front tire. You wanna pull it in progressively, right? It should take you almost a full second to get all the way to full braking power, right? We don't want to hammer that brake. We don't want to stab at it either. We want to have it nice and smooth, but we want to give a lot of force once we get there. Body position is critical whenever you're heavy on the brakes. You need to get your weight back. The harder you're braking, the further back you need to get your body weight. So now you've seen the proper technique. That's not enough. You still need to practice, and you need to incorporate this technique into everyday riding, every time you come to a stop using both of your brakes. The reason for this is you need to build the correct muscle memory so that in a moment of panic, you'll react appropriately and be able to stop your motorcycle.